It all started in that cold, dark cell beneath the Red Keep. The air was damp, heavy, with the smell of mildew and death. Ned Stark sat in silence, head low, his beard longer and rougher than he remembered it ever being. His wrists were sore from the chains, his honor even more bruised than his body. He had confessed. Lied, even. For his daughters, he had thrown his name to the mud. For Sansa's safety. For Arya, wherever she was. For the sake of peace. Varys had whispered to him just days before, "Take the black. You'll have your life. The Boy King will be merciful. The realm will heal." And Ned had listened. Not because he believed Joffrey to be merciful, but because the spider was right about one thing: dead men don't protect daughters. If he was to be sent to the wall, to live, to watch over the realm from the shadows, then so be it. And so the city gathered that day under the blazing sun, not knowing what justice meant in a place ruled by madness. The crowd roared when Ned Stark was dragged out, his legs trembling, barely able to stand. Sansa was there, tears streaming down her face. Septa Mordane was dead, Arya was missing, and all that was left of House Stark in the capital was one broken girl and a disgraced lord. "I am Eddard Stark," he had said through cracked lips, "and I betrayed the true king. A lie, yes, but a necessary one." Cersei had played her part. She had whispered to Joffrey the words she thought he'd obey. "Let him take the black. Show mercy. Prove yourself better than your enemies." But Joffrey had other plans. In that moment, he smiled that cruel, childish smile that only monsters wear, and ordered Ned's head to be taken. Just like that. No discussion, no ceremony, just cold steel and royal madness. Only this time, something changed. As Ser Ilyn drew his sword, the Kingsguard hesitated. Even they weren't sure they had heard the order right. The Queen stepped forward, anger flaring in her voice. The agreement was clear. "Your Grace." "He takes the black." Joffrey sneered at her, waving his hand like a spoiled child denied a toy. "I am the king, and traitors die." But Tywin Lannister wasn't there, not yet. And without his shadow, Cersei's voice held some weight. The small council stirred. The High Septon looked uncomfortable. Varys lowered his eyes. Littlefinger smiled, always amused by chaos. Then Grandmaster Pycelle stepped forward and dared to speak in public. "Perhaps, Your Grace, a display of mercy will serve the crown better than fear." For a long, terrible moment, it seemed the boy would scream again, would demand the execution. But then Sansa, trembling, collapsed to her knees before the throne. "Please," she begged, voice broken and desperate. He confessed. "Let him live. I beg you, Joffrey. Please." And for a moment, perhaps, just that Joffrey tasted the power of mercy. He raised his hand, dramatic, theatrical, and said, "Very well. Let the traitor take the black. But he is no Stark anymore. He is nothing." The crowd didn't cheer. They didn't boo. They murmured, whispers of confusion. Was this weakness? Was it justice? No one knew. But it didn't matter. Ned Stark would live. They dragged him away, half limping, half carried, back into the darkness. For the first time since he arrived in King's Landing, he took a long breath. He was broken, yes, but he was alive. Later that night, Varys visited again. This time, he brought news. Arya had been seen near the docks. A blacksmith's apprentice was helping her escape. Sansa would remain at court. She had been promised protection for now. And Ned, he would be escorted north under heavy guard, escorted by the Night's Watch and watched by the Crown's men. There would be no escape, no turning back. The wall awaited. He stared into the flickering torchlight as the eunuch left. His hands trembled. Honor had brought him here. Lies had saved his life. And now, in the farthest corner of the world, he was being sent to live among murderers, thieves, and bastards. But in that quiet moment, Ned Stark thought of Jon. The wall was not home. But it was something. If only he had known the wall held more secrets, more danger, and more betrayal than King's Landing ever could. The ride north was long, cold, and quiet. Ned Stark hadn't spoken more than a few words since they left the capital. His face remained unreadable, but his mind was louder than ever. Each night he sat by the fire, rubbing his wrists where the shackles once dug into his skin, wondering if it had all been a mistake, if perhaps he should have accepted death rather than live as a man without a name. He wasn't Lord Eddard anymore, not even Ned Stark. He was just another oathbreaker heading to the wall, wrapped in a black cloak and shame. The men guarding him weren't Night's Watch brothers, not yet. A few were city guards, low-born and disinterested in honor. Others were members of the Gold Cloaks sent to ensure he didn't run. Not that he could have. His body still ached from the beating, and his spirit was thin like ice stretched too far across a river. They passed small villages, most too afraid to offer bread or fire once they saw who he was. The whispers had spread already. That's the Stark who betrayed the king, the wolf who bent the knee. He ignored them. He'd learned long ago that words could wound more than swords, and right now he had enough wounds already. It wasn't until they reached the neck, passing Moat Cailin, that something shifted inside him. The air turned colder. Yes, but it wasn't just the weather. It was the scent, the trees, the moss-covered stones. He was closer to the north now, and with every mile it whispered to him, "You are home." But he wasn't. Not truly. Winterfell was behind him. Bran, Rickon gone from reach. Catelyn, angry and heartbroken. Robb, now a man grown in war. And Jon, well, Jon was the only one he might see again. When they finally approached Castle Black, the wall loomed in the distance like some ancient god carved out of ice, taller than anything man should have made. Darker than Ned remembered. He had seen it only once, long ago, before Jon was born. Back when Benjen still smiled, and the realm still had a bit of hope left in it. Now it looked like a tomb waiting to swallow him whole. At the gates, the guards barely looked surprised. News had reached them days ago, a lord turned traitor, a highborn kneeling in chains. They muttered his name, but not with awe, with fear, confusion, maybe even pity. Jon was waiting. He stood there, older somehow, even though it had only been months. His eyes carried something new burden, command. He was a steward, yes, but no one at the wall ever looked at Jon Snow and saw just a steward. "Ned," he said, quiet. "Jon." The words hung between them like smoke from the fire. They didn't embrace. They didn't need to. But Jon's eyes were searching his face for the truth. "Is it true?" Jon asked at last. "What they said in the letters? That you confessed?" Ned looked away. "I did what I had to. For Sansa. For Arya. For the realm. If you can believe that." Jon said nothing. He only nodded. Maester Aemon welcomed Ned with the same voice he gave all men who arrived at the wall, gentle, ancient, and honest. "You'll find no lords here, Lord Stark, only brothers." "I'm no lord," Ned replied, and he meant it more than he expected. They gave him a cell of his own, a bed, a cloak, the same as every man who came here. But everyone knew he wasn't the same. Some stared in silence, some whispered when he passed. He wasn't sure which was worse, being hated or being feared. That night, he stood atop the wall for the first time. The wind was cruel, as if trying to peel his skin off, but he stood there anyway, looking out at the endless snow, the black trees far beyond. Somewhere out there, Mance Rayder was building his army. The dead were moving again. The world was changing. And here he was, a broken man who once ruled the north, now reduced to a name on a roster. He thought of Catelyn, of Robb, of the war that must be brewing, of Lannisters and betrayal, of truths he had never spoken, not even to Jon, especially not to Jon. If he had only told him. Ned clenched the frozen railing tight. Maybe one day he would. Maybe one day he'd speak the truth that had haunted him all these years. But for now, he would wear the black. He would keep his vow. He would survive. He had to. Because something told him deep in his bones that his story at the wall wasn't just beginning. It was never meant to be just a punishment. It was fate. Winterfell burned in his dreams. Ned Stark would wake up each night with the image of his home wrapped in fire and snow, smoke rising from the towers, the screams of wolves echoing in the wind. Sometimes it was Robb's voice he heard, sometimes Rickon's. Once he saw Catelyn standing on the battlements, arms outstretched, calling for him before being swallowed by flame. But when he woke, there was only darkness, and cold, and silence. Life at the wall was harsh, but not unfamiliar. He'd grown up in the north. He had hunted in winter storms, fought in snow, buried friends in frozen earth. But this was something else. There was no warmth in Castle Black, no joy, no future. He kept to himself, mostly. The other brothers gave him space, some out of respect, others out of fear. One even spat near his boots once, calling him King's dog, but the others quickly shut him up. Even here, the name Stark still carried weight. Not much, but enough. Jon tried to reach him, tried to talk some nights, to sit beside him in the mess hall or on patrol, but Ned kept their conversations short. He didn't want to draw attention to Jon. The wall was full of bitter men with longer memories than they'd admit. The last thing Jon needed was whispers of favoritism or questions about bloodlines. Still, he watched Jon closely. The boy had changed. He moved with more confidence now, spoke with clarity, led with something that reminded Ned of Robb, not his age, but his soul. He wasn't just growing into a man. He was growing into something more, something the North might need someday. One evening, as snow fell in thick, quiet flakes, Samwell Tarly approached him. Sam was kind, nervous, but kind. He respected Ned, though he didn't quite know what to say around him. "My lord, sorry, sir, Ned," Sam stammered. "Jon said you might be willing to speak. About, well, the old days. About your brother Benjen." Ned's face tightened. Benjen, another wound that hadn't healed. "I don't know what happened to him," Ned said flatly. "But I fear it wasn't natural." Sam nodded. "We all fear that." There was silence between them, broken only by the sound of wind pushing snow against stone. Sam hesitated, then added softly, "Jon looks up to you, you know. He always has, even now." Ned didn't respond. Later that night, Ned stood atop the wall again, eyes drifting across the forest beyond. Something was out there. He could feel it. Not just the cold or the wildlings, something older, something worse. He turned when he heard steps behind him. "Ghost likes you," Jon said as the white direwolf padded close to Ned's feet and sat silently. "I always had a way with wolves," Ned said, his voice almost a smile. Jon stepped beside him, glancing out into the darkness. "They're calling me Lord Commander's steward now. Might not sound like much, but I think it means something." "It does," Ned replied. "They're watching you." Jon hesitated. "I wanted to ask you something. About my mother." Ned's jaw clenched. The one question he always feared. "Jon, I just want to know who she was," Jon said. "Not even her name." Ned closed his eyes. He couldn't. Not yet. He'd carried this secret for so long, buried it deeper than anything else in his life. For Lyanna, for Jon, for Robert's rage. "It's not the right time," he whispered. John said nothing, just nodded, tight-lipped, the disappointment like a shadow in his eyes. Before they could speak more, the horn blew once a signal from the gate, riders approaching. Not wildlings, not deserters. A raven had arrived earlier from the south, saying men would come from Winterfell. Ned hadn't believed it. He thought Robb would be too busy with war to send anything beyond a letter, maybe a curse. But when he descended to the courtyard, cloaked in black, the snow crunching beneath his boots, he saw them. Men bearing the direwolf sigil, men with northern blood, and leading them a man with auburn-red hair, tall and lean, carrying a sword. Ned recognized at once. Rodrik Castle. He bowed before him. "My lord," Rodrik said, though the word felt wrong now, "I bring news from the north. And a request." Ned narrowed his eyes. "What news?" Rodrik looked up, grim-faced. "Robb Stark marches south. The bannermen are gathering. The war has begun. And he wishes his father's counsel, if he still lives." Ned felt his heart stop for a breath. The war he had tried to prevent was here, and the boy he raised now led it. But what could a man of the Night's Watch do? Nothing, unless the rules were broken. And something deep inside him, the wolf, still alive beneath the black, whispered that they would be. Rodrik Cassel looked older than Ned remembered. His beard was streaked with white, and his eyes had grown heavy with sleepless nights and long rides. But the man still carried himself with pride, northern pride, the kind that wasn't easily broken, even when all the world turned upside down. They sat in the Lord Commander's solar, away from the ears of brothers and ravens, a fire crackling weakly in the hearth. Rodrik spoke plainly, as he always had. "Robb has taken up your banner, my lord," the bannermen have answered. "The Umbers, the Karstarks, the Mormonts, even the Glovers, he rides for Riverrun, to free your lady wife and avenge your name." Ned sat quietly, the flames flickering in his eyes. The words hit him like cold water. Not just because Robb had marched, but because it meant war had truly come. And he wasn't there to stop it. "I never wanted this for him," Ned said, barely above a whisper. "He's just a boy." "Aye," Rodrik nodded, "but he's your son. And the North remembers." Ned looked away. "And my daughters? Arya?" Rodrik hesitated. "There's been no word of Arya, not since the purge began. The Lannisters swept through the city, killed the household guard, took Sansa hostage. She's still with them." That one sentence stabbed deeper than any sword could. Ned clenched his fists so tight his knuckles went white. He had traded everything, his honor, his name, his truth, to protect them. And still they suffered. Rodrik's voice dropped to a near whisper. "The boy king," he lied. Ned's laugh was hollow. "He was never a king." Maester Aemon entered quietly, his blind eyes scanning the room like he could still see the tension clinging to the air. "You know the vows," Aemon said softly. "Once spoken, they are not easily broken." Rodrik turned to the old man. "With respect, Maester, Lord Stark was forced into those vows by deceit. That boy Joffrey broke the agreement. The crown betrayed the peace." Ned raised a hand. "I made the vow. Whatever the reason, I am bound to it." Aemon walked to the fire and stood beside it, warming his frail hands. "When I was young, I too was bound by oaths. And then my family burned, one by one, and I did nothing, because I chose the Watch." He turned his pale face toward Ned. "You must ask yourself, Lord Stark, where does your duty truly lie? With the realm, or with your blood?" Ned didn't sleep that night. He stood at the top of the wall again, the cold biting his bones. Snow fell like ash, and he felt as if he was standing in a graveyard of kings and broken men. The world below him was drowning in chaos. The South had betrayed him, the North was rising, and the wall, once his sentence, now felt like a prison. Jon joined him just before dawn, wrapped in his heavy black cloak, Ghost trailing silently behind. "I heard Sir Roderick came," Jon said. Ned nodded. "The war has begun." Jon didn't respond for a while. He just stared out at the endless frost beyond the wall. "And what will you do?" Ned didn't answer. He didn't know. But in his gut, something twisted a feeling that choices were running out and the rules no longer applied. The wall wasn't just the end of the realm. It was the edge of everything he knew to be true. Later that morning, a raven arrived from Eastwatch. The message was short, blunt. Whites spotted near the gorge, moving in groups, not raiders. Ned read it twice. Then again. Maester Aemon's face went pale when he heard, "If this is true, the long night stirs again." Jon's expression hardened. "We need to ride." "No," said Sir Alistair Thorne, arms crossed. "You'll stay. Let the Lord Commander decide." But the Lord Commander wasn't there, and the weight in that room shifted. All eyes turned to Ned. And for the first time since he arrived at Castle Black, someone said it not as an insult, not as sarcasm. "Lord Stark," one of the rangers asked, "what are your orders?" Ned looked around the room, felt the cold in his lungs, heard the distant echo of wolves. He wasn't a lord anymore. He wasn't even free. But maybe that didn't matter. Because something was coming for them, something worse than kings, worse than war. And the wall would not hold without men to stand tall. If the world was breaking its oaths, maybe he would too. The morning air was bitter and sharp, the kind of cold that clung to your bones even under thick black furs. Ned Stark stood in the courtyard of Castle Black, surrounded by men of the Night's Watch, who still didn't quite know what to make of him. He was supposed to be one of them, just another crow in black, but none of them could forget who he had been. That morning, he took command. There was no formal ceremony, no horns, no speeches, just quiet nods and wary glances passed among the senior rangers and stewards. Sir Alistair scowled, of course, but even he had enough sense to keep his mouth shut. The wall didn't have time for politics. Not when the dead were rising in the woods beyond. Ned ordered 2 scouting parties, one east, one west, both with ravens. No delays. "Stay in pairs," he warned the rangers. "Keep your torches burning through the night. If one man hears something, the other listens. No splitting up. And if the dead do come, burn what you must." They didn't question him, not openly. Some of the older men had fought alongside Ned in Robert's rebellion. They remembered the quiet strength in his voice, the steel behind every word. He hadn't come to lead, but when leadership was needed, he didn't flinch. Jon rode with him. Ned had debated leaving him behind. He wanted to protect him, as he always had, in silence and secrecy. But Jon wouldn't allow it. "We're brothers now," Jon said. "I took the same oath you did." "No, you didn't," Ned thought bitterly. "You took it by choice. I took it under threat." Still, he nodded. There was no use arguing with Stark blood. It was stubborn, even in bastards. Their small company rode east into the Ghostwood, just beyond the Shadow Tower. 6 rangers, 2 stewards, 1 former lord, and the bastard son, who didn't know the truth of who he really was. The snow deepened as they rode, blanketing the trees and deadening every sound around them. It was eerie how quiet the world became in that cold. Even the crows were silent. They found the first corpse on the 2nd day. It was curled against a tree trunk, frozen stiff, with eyes wide and white as polished stone. But there was no blood, no wounds, just a look of pure, frozen terror. Samwell turned away and vomited behind a bush. "Touch nothing," Ned ordered. They built a fire and burned the body before nightfall. The flames didn't roar like they should have. It was as if the forest resisted heat now, as if even fire was a stranger here. That night, they took turns on watch. Ned sat beside the flames, Ghost lying silently at his feet. Jon didn't sleep. He stared into the trees, like something would step out at any moment. Ned watched him. He looked more like a man than a boy now, his face sharper, eyes colder. But still, under all that, there was the same question. Who am I? You asked me once about your mother, Ned said suddenly, the words coming from somewhere deep, where he had buried them years ago. Jon turned toward him, caught off guard. Ned looked away, ashamed even now. I promised someone I would never speak of her. To protect you, to protect others. Jon sat up straighter. Is she alive? No. Was she a servant? Ned shook his head. Then who? I can't say, Ned said quickly, his voice shaking. Not here, not yet. But I swear to you, Jon, when this is over, when we return to Castle Black, I'll tell you the truth. Jon's jaw clenched, but he nodded. I'm tired of being no one, Ned, of being a Snow. Ned put a hand on his shoulder. You were never no one. A howl broke the silence, not from Ghost, but deep within the forest. Then another, and another. The brothers leapt to their feet, swords drawn, torches lit. Shapes moved between the trees. Not fast, not loud, but wrong. A ranger named Rannick screamed. He never finished. His voice was cut off, not by a blade, but something colder, darker. When they found what was left of him, there was no blood. Only silence and ice. They're here, Jon whispered. The whites came at nightfall. Not in a horde, not with fury, but creeping, deliberate like they had all the time in the world. They fought them off, barely. Fire helped. Ghost helped more. But one steward didn't make it. The others had burns and gashes. Sam was crying. And Ned stood over a corpse that refused to stay dead, even as the fire ate through its blackened limbs. He realized something, right there, as the forest smoked around them. This wasn't just the North's war anymore. This was Death's, and honor meant nothing to the dead. The flames burned through the night, casting long, twitching shadows across the snow as the bodies of the whites finally stopped moving. The smell of burnt flesh clung to everything, their clothes, their cloaks, their skin. Sam couldn't stop crying. He tried, but the sounds kept slipping out of him like hiccups. No one blamed him. Even the seasoned rangers had gone pale. Ned Stark stood over the blackened pile of limbs, eyes narrow, face unreadable. His sword was in his hand, slick with melted ice and the strange dark liquid that passed for blood in the dead. Jon stood beside him, breathing hard, a long gash down his arm already freezing stiff from the cold. "We need to ride," Ned said finally. "Now. They're watching us." "They?" asked Sabren, one of the older rangers, his voice shaking. "You mean there's more?" Ned didn't answer. He didn't need to. The cold had changed. It was no longer just winter's breath. It carried something else now, something sharp, unnatural, a silence that hunted sound. They rode without sleep, pushing their horses until the beasts trembled under them. When they reached Castle Black, they barely made it through the gates before one of the guards collapsed in the saddle, frostbitten and near dead. Ned didn't rest. He went straight to Maester Aemon. "They're coming," he said simply, laying a scorched piece of bone on the table, "and fire is the only thing that slows them." Aemon touched the bone gently. "The stories were true. They were warnings," Ned replied, "and we forgot them." The castle stirred into chaos. Extra guards were posted. Every man was ordered to carry flint and torches. The blacksmiths began reforging weapons with dragon glass, what little they had left. Sam had read of it once. Jon had remembered. Still, it wouldn't be enough. That evening, Ned called a council, an emergency gathering of all senior officers and ranking men. Even Sir Alicer showed up, though he sneered through every word. "You're not Lord Commander," Alicer spat. "You were sent here to die in shame, not rule us." "And yet I'm the only one who's seen what's coming," Ned replied calmly. "Even if it's true," Alicer said, "we have no army, no support, and no food for a siege. We'll burn through the stores before winter is done." "We won't survive if we wait," Jon said. "We need allies, riders to Winterfell, to the Vale, to anywhere still breathing." "They won't listen," another ranger muttered. "No one south of the Neck believes in dead men walking." "They'll listen to me," Ned said. "If I ride." That sparked murmurs. Shock. Objection. "You're bound by your vows," Sir Alicer snapped. "You step off that wall, you break them." "I was forced into those vows by a mad king's son," Ned answered, rising from his seat. "And if keeping them means letting the realm fall into death's hands, then they were never worth taking." The room went silent. The truth had been spoken. Jon looked at him, not with disappointment, not with awe, but with understanding. Later that night, Jon found him alone, sharpening his blade. Ice was gone, melted down by the Lannisters. All he had now was a standard longsword, but steel in the hands of a Stark still meant something. "You'll be called deserter," Jon said. "Oathbreaker." "I was called traitor once," Ned replied, not looking up. The truth didn't matter then either. Jon shifted uncomfortably. "If you go south, will you tell Robb the truth? About everything?" Ned paused, the stone scraping against the blade going still. "Yes," he said after a long moment. "I owe him that. I owe all of you the truth, even if it costs me." Jon nodded slowly, then whispered, "And what about me?" Ned looked at him finally. For the first time in years, he saw Lyanna's eyes staring back at him. Brave, scared, honest. "When I return," Ned said, "you'll know everything." Jon said nothing, but there was a storm in his chest now, thundering in silence. At dawn, Ned Stark rode out of Castle Black. Not with fanfare, not with banners, just a black cloak, a sword, and the weight of a world that had started to rot from the north down. He had broken his oath, and he would be hunted for it. But as he looked back at the wall shrinking behind him, as cold wind howled across the frozen earth he knew in his bones, he was never meant to take the Black Tuas. He was meant to break it. The first few days of Ned's ride south were quiet, but not peaceful. The snow had softened into wet, heavy slush, slowing the horses, soaking every cloak, and freezing fingers to reins. He travelled with 2 rangers from the watchmen who had chosen to ride with him, knowing full well it meant exile and possibly death. They asked no questions. They simply followed the man they still called Lord Stark, whether the world did or not. The road was empty of travellers. War had emptied the north. Villages were abandoned, some looted, others eerily untouched, like their people had simply vanished overnight. Smoke still curled from a few roofs, but no voices echoed, no laughter, only the wind howling like a dying beast. By the 5th day, Ned saw the first body hanging from a tree, a deserter probably. The North had its own justice in war, and mercy was rarely part of it. On the 6th night, they made camp near a frozen riverbed. The 2 rangers took turns on watch. Ned didn't sleep. He stared at the stars through the branches above, thinking of Winterfell, of Catelyn, of Robb, and of the words that had sat on his tongue so long they had begun to rot. "Jon is not my son." He had tried to protect the boy. From Robert, from the truth, from a world that would have killed him for the blood in his veins. But in doing so, he had made Jon a ghost, a boy caught between 2 names and belonging to neither. Ned had paid for that silence. Every day of it. The next morning he sent one ranger east toward White Harbor with a sealed message meant for House Manderley. Another he sent west to Bear Island. Both carried news not of war but of death rising in the far north. Ned's path bent toward the south, toward Robb. The young wolf was encamped near the twins, preparing to negotiate passage with Lord Walder Frey. A river divided them from their enemies and their allies. Ned approached under heavy guard, his black cloak traded for plain leathers, his face half-shadowed by a hood. The guards at the camp's edge didn't recognize him until he spoke. "I am Eddard Stark of Winterfell," he said simply. "I seek my son." The silence that followed was thick and strange, part disbelief, part fear. They thought he was dead, or worse, disgraced and forgotten in the cold. They brought him before Robb without delay. The tent was wide, filled with maps, swords, and nervous men with high-born names. Catelyn was there, standing beside her son, eyes rimmed red, face hard as stone. When she saw him, her lips parted, but no words came. Robb turned, and for a long moment he didn't speak. His boyishness was gone. He wore armor not like a costume, but like a second skin. His hair had grown longer, his face sharper, but his eyes, they were Ned's eyes. The same quiet rage, the same desperate hope. "I saw your head on a spike," Robb said flatly. "I'm sorry you had to see that," Ned replied, "but it wasn't mine." A long silence stretched between them. Then Catelyn moved. She reached out, hesitantly as if afraid touching him might break the spell. When her fingers grazed his cheek, she let out a gasp. "Ned, I'm here," he whispered, and for the first time in what felt like years, she collapsed into his arms. Her sobs were quiet, but deep. Robb watched them, silent. Then he stepped forward and hugged his father. Not like a child, not like a soldier, but like a son who had carried too much weight, too soon. Later that evening, after the council had disbanded and the tent emptied, Robb sat with him beside the fire. "Mother told me what they did," he said, "what you said to survive." Ned nodded. "It was never justice, only politics. I chose to live, for your sisters, for the North, for John." Robb's jaw tensed. "He's at the wall. Letters said he's changed, stronger, different." "He has," Ned replied. "You love him like a son," Robb said, testing something beneath the words. Ned looked into the flames. "I love him because he is my blood." That silenced Robb. "But he is not my son." Robb's head jerked slightly. "What?" Ned took a breath that seemed to draw in years. "Jon Snow is not my bastard. He's not a Stark born of shame. He is the son of Lyanna and Rhaegar Targaryen." The silence after that felt like the whole world had stopped turning. Robb stared at him, as if he'd been struck. "That's treason." "It's truth," Ned replied. "And one day it may save the realm, or doom it. That depends on who hears it." Robb stood slowly, pacing, his fists clenched. "All my life I hated him for having what he didn't deserve. A name, a place in our home. I thought he was your mistake." Ned stood. "He was my promise." A long pause. Then Robb turned to him, face pale. "Does he know?" "Not yet." Robb exhaled. "He must." Outside the tent, the wind howled again, but it wasn't snow it carried this time. It was the breath of war. And Ned Stark knew his truths had only begun to unravel the world. The next morning, Ned stood alone on a hillside above the river, watching the mist roll over the water like a shroud. Below him, the Stark banners swayed in the wind, grey direwolves against white, and the camp bustled with life, sharpening steel, saddling horses, feeding fires that would soon be choked by blood. His secret had changed everything. Robb had barely spoken since. Catelyn had not spoken at all. She hadn't looked at him either. Not since the night before, when she whispered, "You kept that from me. All these years." Ned had no defense, only a broken heart and a promise that never felt heavier than now. But Jon was still in the dark, still at the wall, still thinking himself a mistake of honor instead of a child born from war and love and fear. A rider approached from the southern edge of the camp, one of Robb's scouts. He dismounted quickly, his face pale and hands shaking. "They've taken River Run," the scout said breathlessly. "The Lannisters hold the Tullys. Your brother is a prisoner, Lord Edmure too. The Kingslayer marches west." Robb called his banners to move. The war was no longer just about vengeance, it was survival. But Ned wasn't sure he belonged on this battlefield anymore. He wasn't a general. Not anymore. He wasn't even a lord. He was a ghost of the North, risen from shame, carrying a truth no one had asked for. Later that evening, as the army prepared to march toward the twins, Ned sat with Catelyn in her tent. The silence between them was colder than any snowstorm he had ever weathered. "I did it to protect him," he said again. "I know," she said quietly, "but you also hurt all of us to do it. I thought I could bear that. I thought the truth was more dangerous than the lie." She looked at him, and her eyes, those fierce mother's eyes, were wet but steady. It was... Before he could respond, Robb entered. His armor was half-strapped, his cloak already dusted in frost. "I'm sending a raven to the wall," he said. "Jon should know what he is, and what we face." Ned nodded. "But not all of it. Not yet." "Why not?" "Because the wall will be his test. Not war, not thrones, not bloodlines. If he survives what's coming from the north, then he'll be ready for what comes from the south." Robb swallowed hard. "And if he dies, then it's already too late." They marched the next morning. The crossing at the Twins loomed ahead, and so did Walder Frey. Ned had warned Robb to tread carefully, but the boy was already too deep in the war to smell every trap. As the army approached the bridge, the Freys emerged sour-faced, sharp-eyed, greedy for favors and titles. Ned watched the negotiations from afar, his gut twisting. These were not men of honor. These were men of memory, petty, grasping, the kind who smiled as they sharpened the knives behind their backs. But before any deals could be struck, another raven came. This one from Castle Black. Jon had vanished. Ghost was found in the woods alone, wounded. A few dead wildlings lay nearby, torn apart. But Jon was gone. His sword was gone. His tracks led east toward the mountains. Ned read the letter in silence. Then he read it again. The fear in Samwell's writing was clear. Something had called Jon, something beyond the wall. He handed the letter to Robb, whose brow furrowed. "You said he was the key." Ned nodded. "I still believe that." "Then what do we do?" "We find him." "You want to leave? Now?" Ned didn't answer immediately. He looked out across the river, past the banners and the cold stone towers, and the bitter Frey eyes watching them like wolves. Then he said, yes, he would ride again, not for Winterfell, not for vengeance, but for Jon. Because if Jon was who Ned feared he was and the others were truly rising, then none of this mattered. Not the North, not the crown, not even the Stark name. Only the living and the dead. Robb placed a hand on his father's shoulder. "I'll win the war, father," he said, voice steady. "I hope so," Ned replied, "because when it's over, we'll need a kingdom left to save." And with that, Eddard Stark, Oathbreaker, traitor, father, ghost, mounted his horse again and turned north. Not back to the wall, not back to death, but toward the one life he had lied for, and the truth that might yet save them all. The road back north was lonelier than before. This time, Ned rode without a banner, without allies. Just him, a sword, a fast horse, and the weight of the world sitting on his shoulders like a frozen mountain. He wasn't a lord. He wasn't a brother of the Night's Watch. He wasn't even a soldier in Robb's war. He was just a father chasing a son who didn't yet know the truth of his own blood. Every village he passed had a new story. Lannisters sacked Harrenhal, some whispered. Tywin's men are heading north. Others spoke of Robb's victories, battles won with dire wolves leading charges and northern banners making southern lords kneel. But none of that mattered now. The cold mattered. The air had changed. The closer he got to the wall, the older the wind felt. Like the land itself was retreating, pulling back from something unnatural coming its way. When he reached last hearth seat of House Umber, he found the gates shut tight and the guards pale as ghosts. "You've just missed them," one said. "Who?" Ned asked. "The Rangers, a dozen men from Castle Black, looking for a boy in black, said his name was John." Ned's heart stopped. "Where did they go?" "East," the guard said, "toward the Shadowfort ruins, said he was heading there. But they looked spooked, real spooked." Ned didn't sleep that night. His dreams were full of fire and ice, of Lyanna crying in blood-soaked bedsheets, of John's face turning away from him in disappointment, over and over. The next morning he rode harder, no stops, no rest. He reached Shadowfort after 2 days, or what was left of it. The old watchtower was half buried in snow, its top caved in, walls broken. The corpses of 2 rangers lay out front, swords still in their hands, throats torn open. Their eyes were blue. He burned them without hesitation. Inside the ruin, he found tracks, footprints deeper than a man's, clawed, wide, some human, some not. There was blood on the stairs, but no body. He followed the trail for half a day before the storm rolled in fast and violent, like it was chasing him. That's when he found the wildling girl. She was no older than Arya. Her hair was tangled with snow, her clothes bloodied, her face hollow. She stood in the trees, watching him like an animal would. "You're not from the Wall," she said. "Not anymore." "Where's Jon Snow?" he asked. She tilted her head. "The Fire One." Ned stepped forward. "Where is he?" "He went into the woods," she said, "where the dead don't sleep." They were calling him. "Why would he go alone?" She didn't answer. "Tell me." She blinked slowly. "Because they know what he is." That stopped Ned cold. He stepped back, staring at the girl. She didn't move, didn't breathe heavy. She was too calm. "Who are you?" he asked. She smiled, not kindly. "You'll see," she said, and vanished into the snow. He chased her for a mile before the tracks faded. Nothing but whiteness and wind howling through the trees like a scream swallowed by time. That night, Ned found a cave for shelter. He lit a small fire, wrapped himself in his cloak, and stared at the flames. He couldn't stop thinking of what the girl said. They know what he is. Did the others, the white-eyed whites and their masters, sense his blood, the blood of ice and fire? Was that why they were coming? Jon had Targaryen blood, Rhaegar's blood, the blood of dragon kings, and if the prophecy was true, if there ever was a prince that was promised, could it be him? Or had Ned sent his own son straight into the hands of the dead? As the fire crackled, he made a vow. He would find Jon. Even if it meant walking into the dark, even if it meant facing the very thing he feared most, the truth. Because there was more at stake now than thrones and names. This was about survival. And the boy he once called Snow may be the only one who could save them all, if he wasn't already lost. The deeper Ned rode into the haunted forest, the more the world began to feel like something ancient and cursed, like the gods themselves had abandoned this part of the north long ago. The trees had faces, not carved, not drawn, but natural knots twisted in such a way that their dark, open mouths seemed to whisper as the wind passed through. He told himself it was just his mind playing tricks, but deep inside, he wasn't sure anymore. Not after everything he had seen, not after the dead rose with blue eyes, not after a little girl disappeared into the snow like she was part of it. The tracks had nearly vanished by now. He had to dismount and walk, guiding his horse through thickets, his boots crunching into frozen earth covered in an unnatural frost. It wasn't just cold, it was wrong. Too still, too silent. Then, just before dusk, he found the remnants of a camp, a circle of stones blackened by fire, charred bones, not human, but not animal either. A few pieces of black wool scattered around, a ripped night's watch cloak, blood on the ground, frozen stiff in thick, jagged lines. And there, in the snow, half covered by branches, was Longclaw, Jon's sword. Ned dropped to his knees beside it, brushed away the snow. The blade was untouched. The pommel, carved into the shape of a white wolf's head, stared back at him, eyes made of red garnets. The weapon was too fine to be left behind by accident. Jon would have never abandoned it willingly. He picked up the blade. It was cold, far colder than steel should be. Ned gripped it tightly and stood. The tracks around the area were strange, not just footprints, but drag marks, claw marks, deep ruts in the snow, like something had been pulled, or something had crawled. He followed the trail east, past the last remnants of forest, toward the base of the Frostfang Mountains. Thunder rolled in the sky, even though there were no clouds, only pale light bleeding through the mist above. That's when he heard the first whisper. It wasn't in the wind. It was too close, like someone standing just behind him, speaking in a voice so soft it was more breath than sound. Stark. He spun around, sword drawn, but no one was there. The whisper came again, louder this time. More voices, layered, echoing like ghosts, trapped inside the trees. "Promise me, Ned." That stopped him cold. Lyanna's voice, clear as day. "No," he muttered. "You're not real. You swore it." He dropped to his knees, clutching his head, shaking it violently. "Leave me alone," he growled. "I did what I had to do." The air thickened around him. The temperature dropped so fast his breath turned to mist and hung like smoke. A figure appeared in the fog slowly, step by step, a tall shadow with a face hidden behind long black hair. "Jon?" Ned whispered. The figure didn't answer. But it didn't walk like a wight. It didn't shamble. It moved with purpose, quiet strength. Then it stopped just 10 feet away. Jon. But not the Jon he remembered. He wore no cloak, no armor. Just simple black and grey leathers dusted with frost. His face was pale, not from death, but from something else, like the cold had become a part of him. His eyes weren't blue like the dead, but they weren't entirely brown either. There was something strange in them, something burning beneath the surface. "Father," Jon said quietly. Relief flooded Ned's chest, and he took a step forward. "Jon, thank the gods I've been looking for you." "You shouldn't have come," Jon said, voice colder than the wind. "What happened to you?" Ned asked. "I found your sword, the camp, the blood." "I went where they told me to go," Jon interrupted. "I followed the dreams, the whispers. I thought they were visions. I thought they were my mother." Ned's throat tightened. "And were they?" Jon shook his head slowly. "No. They were something older, something that remembers fire and fears it." "The others?" Ned asked. "They're watching me," Jon said. "But they don't come closer. Not since. It happened. What happened? John looked up toward the distant mountain pass behind him. I saw it. In the ice. A heart, still beating, beneath the ground. It's not just the dead they raise, Father. It's memories, blood, secrets that were never buried. Ned stepped closer. We have to leave. You're not safe out here. You don't belong to them. John stared at him. I don't know who I belong to anymore. You belong to the living, Ned said firmly, and you belong to the truth. John's hands trembled. I know, he whispered. I know who I am. Ned's breath caught. John met his eyes. I saw her, not in the snow, in the fire, a tower, a bed of blood, and your face. Ned lowered his sword. John, you lied to me. I had to. Was it worth it? No, Ned said honestly, but I'd do it again if it kept you alive. John was silent for a long time. Then he turned and began walking back toward the mountain pass. Come, he said, there's something you need to see. And Ned Stark followed into the heart of the frost, into something far worse than death. The path wound through jagged rock and sheets of ice that cracked underfoot like glass with every step. Ned's horse had been left behind. The terrain was too narrow, the air too thin. They were climbing now higher than any ranger dared to go, following John as he moved like he wasn't afraid anymore, like something had changed in him. Ned watched closely, noting every movement. John's silence was heavier than usual, but it wasn't the silence of fear or doubt. It was the stillness of someone who'd stared into something ancient and unspeakable and hadn't turned away. What is this place? Ned asked, his voice echoing off the icy cliffs. John didn't stop walking. No one speaks its name. The first men feared it. The children of the forest tried to bury it. But it's still here. Why come here? John glanced over his shoulder. Because they brought me here. They? John didn't answer. The wind howled again, not like the southern winds of cold, but like screaming voices woven into the gale. Ned tightened his cloak, but it did nothing. The air here didn't just chill the skin, it whispered to the soul. By nightfall, they reached a narrow ridge overlooking a wide, hollow basin, an ancient crater of ice and stone. At its center was a frozen lake, black and still. Around the lake stood pillars of cracked obsidian, taller than men, glowing faintly in the starlight. Some were broken, others half-buried. All were arranged in a circle. It felt wrong. Don't step inside, John warned, not unless you're ready to see it. Ned stepped to the edge, peered down. The surface of the lake looked solid, but something moved beneath it, slow, serpentine, like veins pulsing through a body made of ice. John sat near the edge and unslung his pack. He pulled out dragonglass shards, a torch, and a small pouch of something Ned didn't recognize. This is where they begin, John said. The others, they're not just raised from the dead, they're made. Ned's stomach turned. Made? By who? John looked down at the frozen lake. By the same ones who made me. Ned's jaw tightened. You're not one of them. John gave a bitter smile. Not yet. He stood and walked closer to the edge of the lake, kneeling and placing a hand on the ice. Do you feel that? He asked. Ned stepped beside him. The ice was vibrating, a heartbeat, slow, constant. It's alive, John said. What is? John didn't respond. He stared into the depths like he was trying to remember something just out of reach. Then he pulled a shard of dragonglass from the pouch and threw it across the circle. As it clattered against a standing stone, something stirred beneath the lake. Shapes. Human, or once human. A line of white, bone-thin figures pressed against the underside of the ice, hands splayed, eyes glowing, faintly blue, not bright, like the whites he'd fought, but dimmer, older, like the light inside them was fading, not burning. Ned stepped back, hand on his sword. "They're trapped?" he asked. Jon nodded. "For now, but not forever." "How long have you known this?" "Since I followed the visions," Jon said. "The fire, the tower, the whispers. At first I thought I was going mad. Then I realized they weren't dreams. They were memories." "Whose?" Jon looked at him. "Not mine." Ned swallowed. "Then whose?" Jon didn't answer. Instead, he pointed toward the stone pillars. Symbols were carved deep into them, not in the language of the South, but something older, prehistoric. Ned didn't recognize any of it. "They were warnings," Jon said. "The children of the forest carved them when they still walked here. They knew what they had done when they first made the Night King. They thought they could control death. But death never listens. You think this is where it began?" "No," Jon said quietly. "I think this is where it ends." Ned stared at his son, or the boy he'd raised as his son, and didn't recognize him anymore. There was too much weight in his voice, too much fire behind the frost in his eyes. "You have to leave," Jon said suddenly. "What?" "I brought you here because you had to see it, to understand. But now you need to go back. Tell Robb, tell the North, the wall will not hold. The war they're fighting, it's a distraction. The real enemy sleeps here. For now. I'm not leaving you here alone." "You have to," Jon said, "because something in me is changing. I can feel it." "What does that mean?" Jon looked at his hands. They were trembling. "They're not calling me anymore," he whispered. "They're listening." Ned stepped forward and grabbed his shoulder. "I won't leave you." Jon looked up, eyes full of fire and frost. "You may not have a choice." And just as he said that, the lake cracked. The sound echoed like a scream across the mountains. The heart beneath the ice had started to beat louder. The crack spread like a lightning bolt across the lake. Ned watched it splinter outward from the center, thin at first like a spiderweb etched in frost, then it widened, deepened, and a groaning sound followed, low and ancient, as though the mountain itself were waking from sleep. Jon stepped back from the edge. "We need to go. Now." But it was already too late. The ice burst open in the center of the frozen lake, not in an explosion, but in slow, deliberate collapse, like something underneath had simply pushed up, tired of waiting. A plume of cold mist rose into the air, twisting like a serpent, before fading into the twilight. Ned drew his sword. His knuckles whitened around the hilt. His heart pounded. From the black water, something rose. At first, it looked like a man, tall, thin, pale blue flesh tight over bone. But the closer it got, the more it became clear this was no man. Its eyes burned not with fire, but with an eerie blue light, brighter than any white Ned had ever seen. Its face was smooth like polished stone, and its mouth didn't move when it emitted a low, echoing growl. Behind it, others began to follow, not crawling but walking, calm, straight-backed, as if they'd never died, as if they'd been waiting patiently beneath the ice for this very moment. Jon stood frozen, not with fear, but recognition. "They've seen me," he whispered. Ned stepped between Jon and the rising creatures, his blade steady. "Run," he said. Jon didn't move. "I said run." "They're not here to kill me," Jon said quietly. "Not yet." Ned turned slightly. "You're not making sense." Jon's voice hardened. "They're testing me." The lead figure stepped onto the icy shore. Its bare feet made no sound, no splash. It left no wet prints, no fog from breath, just silence. Then it raised its arm, long, pale, skeletal, and pointed directly at Jon. Ned moved to strike, But Jon held out his hand. No, Jon. I need to know what they want. Ned's heart pounded in his ears. They want death. Then let them show it to me. Jon stepped forward, past Ned, toward the thing that should not be. The others, 5 of them now, stood in a half-circle, watching him with those burning eyes. They did not move, did not speak. They only stared. Jon reached the center of the circle. For a moment, there was only wind. Then the lead other stepped forward and reached out its hand, long fingers like icicles, and placed 2 fingers on Jon's chest. Jon gasped. His eyes rolled back, his knees buckled, but he did not fall. The other withdrew its hand, and Jon stood still, shivering. Then, slowly, he turned back to Ned. They showed me, Jon said. What did they show you? Jon blinked. A tear slid down his cheek and froze instantly. The truth. Ned rushed forward and caught him as he staggered. His skin was ice cold, his breath shallow. They weren't created to conquer, Jon whispered. They were created to contain something. Ned frowned. Contain what? Jon looked into his eyes. Fire. Ned stepped back, confused. What do you mean? The children of the forest made them to stop mankind, not from expanding, but from becoming what they feared most. Fire, magic, Targaryen blood, dragonfire. They saw a future where men ruled not just kingdoms, but the skies. So they planted ice into the world to slow it down, to balance it. Ned's blood ran cold. And you? I'm both, Jon said. Ice and fire, the very thing they were made to stop. Suddenly, the other raised its hand again, not toward Jon this time, but toward Ned. The temperature dropped instantly. Frost raced across the ground toward his boots. Jon stepped in front of him. No! The other froze, its head tilting as if curious. Then, slowly, it lowered its hand. They don't want to kill you, Jon said. But they know I won't stay if you're in danger. You have to leave, father. Now. Ned clenched his jaw. Not without you. If you stay, they will kill you. To test me, to see what I'll choose. And what will you choose? Jon looked down. I don't know. That answer terrified Ned more than any sword. He sheathed his blade, walked forward, and placed his hand on Jon's shoulder, not as a soldier, not as a Stark, but as a father. You are not their weapon, he said. You are my son. Jon's eyes watered again. Then he turned away. I'll find my way back, he said. You'd better, Ned replied, because the North needs a Stark, and the realm needs a Targaryen. With that, Ned turned and walked away, sword drawn, heart heavy. Behind him, the lake was silent once more. But beneath the ice, something still pulsed, and Jon stood alone in the eye of the storm. Ned Stark rode south like a man possessed. Every hoofbeat pounded with urgency, not just in the snow, but in his chest. The wind howled behind him, as if trying to drag him back to the icy horror he'd left behind, the lake, the others, and Jon Snow, his son, his blood, and something else now. Something balanced on the knife edge between light and dark, fire and ice. He rode for days without stopping, through dead villages, burnt fields, and snowdrifts as tall as men. The realm was cracking beneath the weight of too many lies. And now, the truth he had carried for nearly 2 decades, the truth of Jon's birth, of Rhaegar and Lyanna, of ice and fire, no longer felt like a burden. It felt like a warning. When he reached Robb's camp outside the Twins, the banners were already being lowered. The Frey deal had been struck. Robb would marry one of Walder's daughters. Passage across the river was granted. The North marched again toward the south, toward Lannister lines, toward war. Robb looked older now, his armor fit like it was grown onto him. His wolf, grey wind, prowled silently beside his tent, nose twitching, eyes sharp. When Ned arrived, he was brought straight to the command tent. Robb stood over a map, surrounded by Lords Greatjon Umber, Roose Bolton, Galbart Glover. Catelyn sat in the corner, tired eyes tracking every word but saying none herself. When he entered, the tent fell silent. Ned looked around. These were his people, men who had sworn to follow him once, now following his son. "I need to speak with you," Ned said to Robb. "Alone." Robb hesitated, then nodded. The others filed out, each giving Ned a look, some respectful, others suspicious. Roose Bolton lingered a moment too long, his pale eyes unreadable, before leaving last. "You found him?" Robb asked, once the tent was quiet. "Yes." "Is he alive?" "Yes." "And?" Robb stepped closer. "What happened?" Ned didn't answer immediately. He moved to the map table, placed both hands on its edge, and lowered his voice. "Jon is not just of Stark blood. He's something else now. Not changed like a man who sees war, changed like the world is reshaping around him." Robb furrowed his brow. "What do you mean?" "I mean," the others spoke to him. Robb stepped back. "The dead?" "They aren't just dead," Ned said. "They are memory, creation, weapons made to stop fire. And Jon is both, Stark and Targaryen, the very thing they were meant to destroy." Robb said nothing for a long time. Then, "He's the one the prophecy speaks of." "I believe so." Robb clenched his jaw. "And where is he now?" "Still in the Frostfangs, watching them, or being watched. I don't know anymore." Robb paced the tent, breathing hard. "So what do we do?" "We prepare. We warn the other kingdoms. The wall is broken in all but name. The Night's Watch is scattered. Jon holds their attention. For now, but that won't last." "Do we retreat?" Robb asked. "No. We keep moving. But not just toward the south. Toward unity, toward truth. We need the Vale. We need the Riverlands. Gods help us, we may even need Daenerys Targaryen." Robb turned sharply. "The Mad King's daughter? The only one left with fire in her blood." Silence again. Then Robb spoke quietly. "I don't want to believe this. I want to keep fighting like we planned. Cut down the Lannisters, take back the North, rule from Winterfell." "I know," Ned said. "I once thought that would be enough." Robb looked down, then whispered, "Does he hate me? For the way I treated him?" "No," Ned replied. "He never hated you. He only hated not knowing who he was." Robb nodded slowly. "He has your eyes, you know." "No," Ned said softly. "He has Lyanna's." That night, Ned sat alone near the fire, away from the tents, from the men, from the war drums. Catelyn joined him, her cloak drawn tight, her eyes distant. "You saw the things in the snow?" she asked. "I saw them." "And Jon?" "He's stronger than I feared, but he's walking a path I can't follow." Catelyn stared into the fire. "When I look at the flames, all I see is death." "That's not death," Ned replied. "That's truth. Fire shows what the cold hides." "You still love him," she said quietly. "After all." "I always did," he answered, "just from behind a lie." She nodded, said nothing more. But deep in the woods beyond their camp, wolves howled, not just grey wind, not just strays. And the wind that carried those howls felt sharper than winter should allow, as if something ancient was drawing near. The night was too quiet. Ned Stark had learned to read silence like a book. In war, silence was never peace. It was always the breath before the blade. The northern camp lay still beneath grey skies. Snow drifted lazily from the heavens, falling on tents, wagons, and men who slept with swords beside their pillows. Even grey wind, ever restless, paced slowly with his head low, ears twitching. Something stirred in the woods beyond the twins, something none of them could name. Robb stood beside Ned, his young face drawn hard by command, but his eyes betrayed him. The storm behind them never left. "We cross the twins at dawn," Robb said. "Lord Walder has agreed. We march south after." Ned said nothing. His gaze lingered on the trees. "You think he'll betray us?" "I think if betrayal pays better than loyalty, Lord Frey will sell us all before breakfast." "Then why cross?" "Because we must." Robb nodded grimly. But Ned's mind wasn't on Walder Frey. His thoughts were in the Frostfangs, in the lake beneath the ice, in Jon's pale face and burning eyes. There were two wars now. The one men fought for power, and the one no man understood for survival. Robb turned away, but stopped. What if Jon doesn't come back? Ned placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then we hold the line, until we can't." That night, ravens came from the wall. The letter was sealed with black wax. It bore no sigils, no names, just a single line in shaky script. "They are moving." Ned read it 3 times. "They?" Robb asked. "The dead." No one slept that night. By morning, the army was moving, formation tight, scouts forward, banners furled. But as they approached the bridge, the Frey guards looked too calm, too polite, smiling in the wrong ways. Ned's instinct screamed. "Something's wrong," he said. "Pull the bannermen back." Before Robb could answer, horns blew from the towers. Then the arrows came, fire-tipped, hissing through the snow. They fell upon Stark men like rain. Tents erupted in flame. Horses screamed. Men died before they even stood. From the towers above, crossbowmen reloaded. Below, Frey swords emerged from wagons, barrels, even the riverbanks. It was a slaughter. The Red Wedding had begun, but this time under open sky. Ned drew his sword and fought like a man who had buried too many already. His blade cut clean through Frey men, blood spraying across the snow. Robb was beside him, grey wind ripping throats open, Stark bannermen forming a shield wall around their lords. But they were outnumbered, surrounded, trapped. It would have ended there, if the horn hadn't sounded again, not from the Freys. From the forest, a low, ancient horn blast, 3 times. Ned froze. So did the fighting. Then came the sound of trees breaking, of hooves crunching snow, but not horses. They emerged from the tree line like ghosts of old figures clad in pale black armor, their faces hidden, their blades shimmering blue with unnatural frost. Behind them walked beasts, direwolves, dead but moving, eyes glowing. And at the center rode a figure cloaked in furs, sword in hand, hair black as night. Jon Snow. He dismounted in silence. Everyone watched him, Frey and Stark, Bolton and Umber, none dared move. He looked at his father, and Ned saw him not as a child, not as a bastard, but as something more. "You left," Ned said. Jon nodded. "To become what I had to. Are you still my son?" Jon's voice was calm. "Yes, but I am not only that anymore." Robb stepped forward, bloodied and panting. "Whose side are you on?" Jon looked around at the flames, the dead, the betrayal in full bloom. "Not theirs," he said. "Not anymore." With one word in a language no one understood, Jon raised his hand, and the snow shifted. From the earth, figures rose, not wights, not corpses, but armored warriors made of ice and fire both. Their eyes burned red-blue. They moved as one, and they only attacked Frey men. In moments, the slaughter turned. Frey soldiers screamed as frost wrapped around their limbs, burning them from the inside. Bolton men fled. Even Roose himself vanished into the woods, abandoning the battlefield. When it ended, the twins burned. Jon stood in the ashes, staring at the river. "You saved us," Robb said. "I delayed what's coming." Ned approached. "And what is coming?" Jon turned, and his voice was no longer a whisper. "A war where no side is righteous, a night that doesn't end, and a fire that burns beneath the snow." Ned felt something twist in his chest. "You're leaving again, aren't you?" Jon nodded. "There's something beneath the wall," he said. "I have to go, and I have to go alone." "Jon, if I fail, nothing will matter. Thrones, names, honor, nothing." He looked at Robb. "You are the king in the north." He looked at Ned. "You were always my father." And then he walked away, into the snow, toward the end, or the beginning. No one saw Jon Snow again for a long, long time. But the world never forgot him, because when the night finally came, they remembered the man who had been both wolf and dragon, and why Ned Stark was never meant to take the black.